Royal life in the 21st century. Rheda Castle in northwestern Germany, the ancestral seat of the Bentheim-Tecklenburg family for more than 6 centuries. If North Rhine-Westphalia comes to terms with its own history, it will come across my family again in some form or other, with a long tradition.
You're not like a politician who holds office and retires eventually.
A princess with a famous aunt, Rosamund Pilcher. The Prince and Princess. If you are unsure, you should say Your Highness. When talking to them both, it's Your Highnesses. A royal balancing act. When someone hears something about nobility, they immediately go a meter higher. 5 castles belong to the family with the illustrious name. Prince and Princess Bentheim-Tecklenburg, Count and Countess of Tecklenburg and Limburg, Lord Rheda and Wafflinghofen, Hoyer, Alpen and Helpenstein and Bailiff of Cologne. This is where the history of the Bentheim-Tecklenburgs begins, in the Hohenlimburg near Dortmund, in the heyday of the Middle Ages, in the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. It all began with a murder, namely the murder of Archbishop Engelbert of Cologne by the Count of Mark-Isenberg in 1225, which is a huge story because the Archbishop was the governor of the empire. The Kaiser was on a crusade in the Holy Land and had appointed the Archbishop as guardian for his son, as well as the governor. That's why it had almost been an imperial assassination. It was all linked to power and influence in the regions of the Rhineland and Westphalia. The murder was executed publicly, his assets were confiscated. The family had now become destitute, and in the Middle Ages, people weren't so thirsty for revenge that they would want to get even with their own children. They just didn't want the children to have to pay for what their father had done. The son received the county of Hohenlimburg and built a castle there. From then on, the family called themselves the Counts of Limburg. Over the centuries and generations, the property was passed on to the children. In the 16th century, a daughter married a Count Bentheim. He inherited the castle and the name Limburg, which the family still bear today. The legendary castle towers high above the town of Hohenlimburg.
I was especially scared of the story of the Black Hand. I cried in the car park and said I didn't want to go in because it had always scared me so much.
The Black Hand, the gruesome relic, is stored in Castle Tower, cut off by an executioner because he had raised it against his mother. Back then, in the Middle Ages. Is the story true? Nobody knows. No member of the Bentheim-Tecklenburg family has lived in the castle for 50 years. Today it is used as a museum, concert hall, registry office and restaurant. For some years now, Hohenlimburg has once again been under the management of the princes, who organise the marketing themselves, a task with a backstory.
There was a war in the 30s and there were fortresses, but it still stands.
The amazing thing about the Hohenlimburg Castle is that it really was always at the heart of all military conflicts which took place, right up to the Second World War. In the 7 Years' War, the Cologne War, it was besieged. Hohenlimburg Castle, fiercely contested since the Middle Ages but never conquered. Another ancestor of the family ruled 100 kilometers to the north. Count Conrad ruled the country of Tecklenburg. He was known as the Wild because he did not always pursue politics following the rules at the time, and he could be quite rigorous. He was related to Philipp von Hessen, who was one of the driving forces of the Reformation in Germany, quickly leading the country towards Lutheran Reformation. The Lutheran Reformation also reached Rheda. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs had already been the lords there for almost 300 years by that point. They came to possess it when, in the 13th century, a Count of Tecklenburg married the only daughter of the lord of the manor, forcing an uncle who believed himself to be the rightful heir into the castle tower. Familial strife occurred even in the highest aristocratic circles. The prisoner was an ancestor of mine who was also held captive by another ancestor. The family relationships were nice back then. He then had to sit here for several days. You can see that from the strokes he had made until he agreed to sign the contract. The markings on the wall were only discovered a few years ago during a renovation. Religion. Most recently in the family, it played a large role in the life of Count Arnold II, the grandson of the Wild One. He studied theology and law and shaped the country and his family. It was also a certain fashion at the time for princes to send their sons to study in Heidelberg or Basel or Strasbourg, and there they were educated in the Reformed religion and also learned the principles of the Reformed faith, which was becoming increasingly linked to Calvinism, as it is probably better called. Around 1590, Count Arnold II personally introduced the Calvin Reformation into his territories. Relics and crosses disappeared from the churches. 2009, Sunday service in the Reformed Church of Hohenlimburg, built in the mid-18th century by a Bentheim-Tecklenburg. Prince Maximilian and Princess Marissa are sitting on the royal bench. In 9 parishes, the family still holds the patronage to this day. They are the lords of the church, as it is officially known. Until 1948, they were responsible for the construction and renovation of the churches. They still have co-decision rights when it comes to filling parish positions. I think that these two institutions, the parish and the royal house, also have something in common today. After all, we are both under a certain amount of pressure to modernize. In other words, we have to somehow explain to people why we should still exist. A small Reformed parish in Hohenlimburg and the royal house of Bentheim-Tecklenburg. Today, the parish is financed in part through rental income from houses donated to the church by the former count in 1750. The Reformation is the origin, according to Max Weber, of capitalism. That is the formula that was found and practiced there. In other words, the economic activity of the subjects at the time, and also later in the family, was always enormously important. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs lived off their estates. Until 1808, the subjects also paid taxes to the family. Skillful family planning also played an economic role. The history of the Bentheim family is of course extremely complicated. There have been more and more marriages, which have led to expansions of the family time and time again. Marriage is really a wonderfully peaceful way to acquire new lands. Under Napoleon, peace in the countries of Hohenlimburg and Rheda came to an end. After being initially occupied by the French, they eventually lost their independence after Napoleon's defeat. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs became subjects of the Prussian king. It was incredibly painful. but they were rewarded in the fact that they could secularize the monasteries and, as it were, pocket their assets. The monasteries of Herzebrock and Clarholz were closed down. A great fortune, castle and hundreds of farms now belong to the Bentheim-Tecklenburgs. Before secularization, a balance always had to be found with the monasteries, which had been the estates there, and that there was no longer the case after secularization. In the end, the prince was the sole ruler for a certain period of time. In 1817, Emil Friedrich Karl of Bentheim-Tecklenburg was appointed prince by the Prussian king. His heirs married into the best Protestant families. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs were rich, even a member of the Berlin House of Lords. However, they were not convinced Prussians. There has always been a sting. People never really wanted to have anything to do with the House of Hohenzollern. And despite the compensation and all the benefits which that brought, the fact that the Hohenzollern has dismissed the Counts of Hohenlimburg was always perceived as bitter. Nevertheless, they used their influence with the Hohenzollern Kaiser. It was thanks to them that the first railway line from Minden to Cologne passed by Rheda in 1887. When the railway was built, which was originally supposed to go to Paderborn and Lippstadt, bigger cities, my ancestor intervened and said, "No, we need a railway here for the economic development of Rheda and Gütersloh," and that's what happened. Along with the railway came economic success. Prince Gustav, today's prince's great-grandfather, was regarded as a modern aristocrat. In 1902, he paid the renovation of the small Rheda synagogue on the edge of the palace park from his own personal funds. The Jewish community was then allowed into the castle park on the Sabbath, which they had exclusively for themselves. And my great-grandfather always went to the synagogue with his top hat on and took part in the service there. The Imperial Hussars, an elite guard in Berlin. After the early death of his father, Adolf, grandfather of Prince Maximilian, became the fourth Prince of Bentheim-Tecklenburg. In 1914, he joined the Hussars as lieutenant in the First World War. He was taken prisoner in Russia in 1917, then experienced the Russian Revolution and all of its ensuing chaos. At some point, he managed to hire a train. However, he could and then travel comfortably west again before getting off here in Germany at some point. The prince returned to a changed country. The Kaiser had abdicated. The Weimar Constitution abolished all privileges of the nobility. The title was reduced to just part of the name. Germany was now a republic, which the House of Bentheim-Tecklenburg in Rheda also rejected. The prince's grandfather was involved in the German nobility cooperative. These aristocrats opposed democracy and the party system and wanted to reanimate the monarchy. He was one of the aristocrats who, after 1918, took a position which was close to National Socialism. However, he did not join the Nazi Party before 1933. Did not join the party as this would have not been in keeping with his social standing as a lord of the manor, or rather a prince. They did not want to make themselves blend with the public. At the beginning of the 1930s, Prince Adolf became chairman of the Nobles Cooperative. Prince Adolf of Bentheim-Tecklenburg married Amalia Schönberg-Wallenberg, a princess from the Saxony aristocracy. The prince was a keen amateur filmmaker, and the cheerful and relaxed private life of the family is the subject of these unique contemporary documents. At home in Rheda Castle, not much of the political upheaval was noticed.
There are always two sides to a person. My father-in-law was a very likable person, but the endearing and the pretty awful sides were very close together. It was a strange thing, which I guess can be said for many historical figures. When you met my father-in-law, he was simply enchanting. That's how I would describe it. He would come and bring me the first violets. All once 2 dogs were shot and he cried.
The children of the couple grew up sheltered and far from political entanglements. There was hardly any travelling at that time. They were conscious of their status, feeling above their peers in the village. Princess Gustava, Prince Nikolaus, and the heir, Prince Moritz Casimir, enjoyed a carefree childhood until... It was closed every evening, this big gate at the bottom, a cast iron gate which was actually impenetrable, and in winter we would ice skate on the moat. Once the Hitler youth leader came by, and we had to stand guard, but the men came and then always went away again. That's how it was. That's how the Hitler youth was too, of course. We had to march on the Verl for God knows what reason. I think that was from the olden days when the regiments would walk in formation towards the enemy. That was no longer the case, but it was still practiced. In the military in East Prussia, we also learned things like that. Nonsensical. Prince Adolf didn't just film the family. He also documented the construction and opening of the A2 motorway not far from the castle. This is how politics found their way into the tranquil Rheda. At the beginning of the Second World War, Hitler's army stationed units in the castle. The prince had also been a member of the Nazi Party since the mid-1930s. I believe that Bentheim, from the social and cultural position from which they operated, had residual skepticism towards the party, towards certain pieces of ideology. But that didn't stop him, and that's really the problem with men like that, who could and should have known better because of their training, education and social status. It didn't stop them from making deals with the party anyway, blatantly and early on. Following Prince Adolf, the aristocracy community was strictly loyal to the regime. He hoped to persuade Hitler to grant old rights to the German nobility, unsuccessfully. Nevertheless, in 1944, Bentheim condemned Stauffenberg's assassination attempt in a telegram to the Führer. It fits into a line that began with Bentheim in 1918 at the latest, probably earlier. This line was the path to the far right, via anti-Semitism, to violent solutions, to rearmament, to a war of revenge and to an alliance with Nazi politics. Why should this suddenly stop here in July 1944? The prince stood with the Nazis until the end of the war in 1945. Of course, we can only regret that he got so close to the Nazis. He was originally conservative and then went over to the Nazis' side. It's a tough history and one that's hard to live with, especially because he was always labelled as the poster boy Nazi. Prince Adolf of Bentheim-Tecklenburg remained president of the nobility cooperative until the mid-1950s. He no longer had any political influence. In 1945, the Bentheim-Tecklenburg castles were occupied by British and American troops. After the withdrawal of Allied forces, Hohenlimburg Castle became the local museum to the city of Hagen. Theatre performances were held in the courtyard and a museum set up in the rooms. Prince Adolf rented out the Clarholz and the Herzebrock monasteries and their associated buildings to the community and private individuals. The family also lived off this money. Rheda Castle was initially requisitioned by the British Army. rooms were then rented out by the royal house. The high renovation and maintenance costs were a heavy burden on the prince. We are standing here in a castle that is one of the most famous moated castles of the Westphalia region. The family haven't lived here for about 20 years though. It's been used for other purposes. Currently, it houses a school for the deaf. The prince would never live at Rheda Castle again. The castle was a thing of the past, he said after the war. He died in a car accident in 1967. His eldest son and heir, Prince Moritz Casimir, became prince. I would have preferred not to, no. I said that to my mother the day after my father died. Thank God my brother is prince now. He's doing very well, really. Moritz Casimir is the father of today's Prince Maximilian. In the mid-50s, he met his future wife at a party at a relative's house.
When I was visiting my mother, I didn't really feel like doing anything. I just wanted a bit of peace and quiet. And at some point, there was a birthday party where I met a young man. And that's how the story goes.
It happened in Africa. Moritz Casimir visited relatives. Cece von Hardenberg visited her mother. In the 1920s, Cece's parents, Count and Countess von Hardenberg, bought a farm in South Africa. An adventurous life began, also for the little girl. Later, as a princess, Cece and her children travelled to Africa again and again.
I have always longed for it. Actually, I still do. The marvelous horizons and mountains, everything there is. But my mother lived there for 65 years. She was a legend there in Africa, at least within the 200 kilometers of where she lived, I would assume. With black people as well as white. She was very motherly.
Back in Germany, Countess Cece accepted an invitation to Schloss Bosfeld. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs had lived there since the end of the Second World War, just a few kilometers from Rheda.
Then suddenly I was back at the Bentheims' doorstep. And then there were lovely little dogs. My father-in-law was thrilled that I loved these dogs so much, because he loved them too. And there was a huge table with an incredible amount of cake at my mother-in-law's house. And then I stood in front of this lovely Bosfeld house and said, "Oh, I'd really like to live here," but without any ulterior motives.
Soon, she did live there. In 1958, Prince Moritz Casimir and Princess Cece married in the chapel of Rheda Castle. Rheda wasn't her home during these years. The buildings were rented out. For many years, Bertelsmann's Book Club from neighbouring Gütersloh had its distribution centre here. The garden was public, the city park of Rheda. The princess personally guided visitors through the palace.
This is actually the last remaining example of this kind of half-timbered farmhouse here. It's very sadly disappearing from the landscape. We fought, and we fought as one. You couldn't say it was with this party or that party. We all fought together. At the beginning, it was supported by young socialists. 18 of them came, quite wild ones, and we had discussions.
Old houses were demolished or completely renovated. Roads were to be built around the castle, and the river straightened. West Germany was in a modernization frenzy, with the princess fighting against it. If it hadn't been for her, things would have looked very different around the palace, because the original intention was to build a dual carriageway through the park in front of where the Chancellery stands today. She prevented all of this in an endeavour that was quite admirable. That's why it's so beautiful here. Cici of Bentheim renovated the halls in Rheda. Under thick layers of paint, she managed to uncover wallpaper that makes the palace one of the most beautiful in the country today. The princess was honoured with the German Heritage Award for her work. When my mother gave guided tours of the castle, we used to go along and listen to them, and it was like seeing a new sight for us. As children, we actually always had a somewhat distant connection to Rheda because it was quite far away, 6 kilometres. The family lived at Bosfeld Castle until 1988. Prince Moritz and Princess Cici's children grew up here. The prince managed the estates. The sons went to the local primary school. They wanted to be normal here, but it wasn't so easy. I was always very selective with my friends as a child, and then I always had one person I really liked, one friend, and with the others, I was a bit more cautious. At the age of 10, Princes Christoph and Maximilian were sent to boarding school in Salem, Germany. The headmaster was a friend of the family. Christoph was the heir and was to become the next Prince of Bentheim-Tecklenburg. 1 week after leaving school, he died in an accident. The death of my brother was a traumatic event for me personally, of course, but also for the whole family. At the time, I was just finishing my A-levels in England. Christoph died in a car accident, like his grandfather.
I was still talking to Christoph until 1 a.m. the night before, and he was very political. He was very intensely involved with politics and his future job in general, and he always wanted to know, "Mummy, why are you doing it like this? Mummy, why are you doing it like this?"
Prince Christoph enjoyed acting. He had many plans and loved travelling.
He went to India as an exchange student. He went to Sicily. He went to Africa with my mother. He packed his life so full of incredibly interesting things. I think he lived his life. I mean, it sounds bad when I say it like that, but Christoph was a wonderful person. But it was his time. I just see it philosophically, or religiously, or however you want to put it.
Prince Christoph was prepared to become a prince one day, but then his younger brother had to step up to the plate. That caused a horror where the dust only really settled over time, and I had to slip into the role that he had had for himself. Prince Maximilian still had time away from home to grow into the role of Prince of Rheda Castle. In England, it wasn't known that I was a prince, and that made life there much easier, much more relaxed. Today, Princess Cici and Prince Maurice Casimir live in their retirement home in Kloster Herzebrock. The prince, seriously ill, has completely retired. The princess has run a small gallery in Herzebrock for many years. There are still regular exhibitions of significant artists. Prince Niklaus, the prince's brother, has also lived and worked here for several years. He is a well-known surrealist and lived in Rome for almost 40 years. It is a quiet life, just as the prince and his brother have always loved it. That's the Benthimide custom. We are the Benthimides. Not appearing too much, remaining alone. It's one of the most pleasant things being secluded. Hereditary Prince Maximilian took his A-levels in England and studied at an elite university. He felt at home there. Under different circumstances, he would certainly have stayed.
Maxi came to one of the hardest, basically probably the most intelligent boarding schools for boys that there is. It is technically better than Eton, Winchester. And from there to go to Cambridge, any English person dreams of this. So to be a foreigner to do that is pretty unusual. You stand out. I can't tell you how much. You can't say he was integrated. He was excelling within the English system as an outsider. That's pretty unusual.
He found his future princess at Park Hill in the south of England. Lady Marissa of Fortescue comes from old British nobility. I always knew I would have to come back at some point, and she was very supportive. The lady saw her place as at the prince's side.
It is a great honor to carry on this story and lead our home. You could see it as a burden, but I think we should see it as a positive thing. We have to carry on this tradition. I am very happy to do so.
So, in 2001, another wedding took place at Rheda Castle. Sir Seymour Fortescue led his daughter, Lady Marissa, down the aisle. People and cameras waited outside for the wedding. The citizens of Rheda enthusiastically welcomed their new princess. The prince and his wife had big plans. The castle was to become the centre of Rheda once again. The young couple saw their place at the ancestral seat of the Princes of Bentheim-Tecklenburg.
She has to be the wife of a prince. She has to run it. She is running the Schloss and the garden, all the events that go on. It's a big job.
Princess Marissa studied theology and worked at Christie's auction house in London. When she met Prince Maximilian, the British woman did not speak a word of German.
How can it not be difficult for anybody? What I find exceptional that she has managed it. And not only that, she has managed it, but that Maxi was clever enough to realize that she would manage it. That is quite something.
Shooting Festival in Rheda. The shooting club has existed for more than 175 years. The prince and princess are members, as were all their ancestors since the club was founded. That's also a part of everyday life. In our region, some of the companies have gigantic turnover figures, and yet we can hold our own very well here because the history that is there carries a lot of weight. Especially in Westphalia, because Westphalia is very history conscious. The Gütersloh district changed rapidly after the war. With 20,000 companies, it is one of the strongest economic regions in the North Rhine-Westphalia. One company in particular stands out, Bertelsmann. With a turnover in the billions, it is one of the largest publishing houses in the world. Around 1840, Bertelsmann was the court printer to the then Prince of Bentheim. If you go to our archive, you will see many documents that were printed by Karl Bertelsmann himself. The family of Bentheim-Tecklenburg even once had a stake in the successful furniture company, Core Interleukerburg. The house is an economic power in the Rheda. Everyone here knows the prince and princess. The royal house is completely accepted by the population here, and due to their rather large property holdings, they are already very important. Rheda Castle lies in the centre of the town. Today, most of the sizable grounds are rented out. Companies have their headquarters here. Nothing is for sale. We are rooted here, and if we were to sell everything we have right now, as others have done in some cases, then we would probably be doing quite well financially. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs are large landowners. Agriculture and, above all, forestry form the basis of their wealth. Countless properties in the region, some of which have been in the family for centuries, are rented out at a profit. Even if the actual power is no longer there, the responsibility and ownership still are. And this is also being carefully managed and held together. Their property has not shrunk in recent decades. It's grown. I don't believe that the prince lives the dream life of a prince on a daily basis, but he lives in the here and now world and his daily duties. And he wouldn't be able to fulfill this daily task if he was constantly thinking about the fact that he is a prince. The prince describes himself as a businessman. He wants to turn the castle back into the spiritual and cultural centre of the district. The district of Gürtelsloh is known as an economically strong district, but the soft location factors will also play an increasingly important role, and the house also plays an important role here. A prince and princess with a feel-good factor. As church patron and president of the Red Cross, they are involved in voluntary work, and when the local hospital was due to close, the family even took to the streets. Everyone who meets the couple notices from their charisma they're a bit different. It's not bourgeois, it's aristocratic, but that's not seen negatively. There's no arrogance or snootiness here at all. On the contrary, people go to great lengths to participate here, to get involved and, as I said, to keep the house open. Spring in the Park is the name of the annual garden festival at Rheda Castle. This sales show for garden products with an associated cultural and sports program has been held since 2003. They both brought the idea from the Princess Marissa's home country of England. Marissa's aunt, best-selling author Rosamund Pilcher, even comes along to help promote the event. A rose in the royal garden is named after her. Here, they want to make money through history and prominence.
I hope they succeed in making a really wonderful attraction in Rheda for visitors and tourists.
Rosamunda Pilcher's fans flock to Rheda Castle. That is ideal. And after all, sometimes the life of their highnesses seems to spring from a novel by the famous aunt. But that's not what people at the castle like to hear.
I really like Rosamunda Pilcher, but it's real life. It's not a novel.
It may feel real, but it is still a privileged life. The prince and princess still own the farm in South Africa. They do not plan to sell their African home. They travel here with their children at least once a year for a few weeks. It's a really nice get-together there, also with the staff. For example, my children each had a baptism, a naming ceremony there, where the sacred drums were brought out and they danced in traditional costumes, where there was a lot of beer and goats were skewered and eaten. A real feast. Prince Moritz is the eldest son of Maximilian and Marissa. Today, there are also two little princesses. He can add the name Magegen to the countless titles of nobility that he will one day bear as prince. This is his African name, which he receives on this day. We all have African names. Mine is Gugela. What does that mean? I don't know. Summer 2009. The prince has gone hunting. He calls it a vacation at home. It is his greatest passion. Caspar Gerd Heinrich has been working for the family since 1961. He knows all about the royal house. The first thing I am asked is, how can you deal with it? How is it? And I say, quite normal. That's it. You can have a normal conversation with everyone. Whether it was Prince Adolf, whether it was the prince's father, Casimir, or whether it was the prince and the princess. A festive day at Rheda Castle, the 40th birthday of the prince. More than 300 guests have been invited to a concert. Dignitaries from the region, aristocratic friends and relatives from all over Europe. A private celebration, but also a business meeting. Here, the cultivation of tradition and local marketing have become one. The castle and its employees have been decorated for the occasion. That's what people think. What? You're doing something like that? Doesn't it even exist? Sure there is. Some people can't understand that, and as a normal citizen, you're in between. The Princes of Bentheim-Tecklenburg acknowledge their history.
I think Max was wise enough to realize that he needed to be there full time. Otherwise, everything just becomes like another hotel. I think it's wonderful that the history is there for people who wish to find out about it. I think it would be lovely to share it with people even if they are not very historically minded. But maybe they would become so having seen this young couple.
Prince Maximilian and Princess Marissa are conscious of their status and, at the same time, close to the people. The guests are a reflection of Westphalian society. Among them are even presidents of major soccer clubs. He promised me that if our team ever won the Champions League, then we could hoist the blue and white flag on the tower. The House of Bentheim-Tecklenburg manages the balancing act between tradition and modernity. Visitors feel as if they've been transported to another time. Perhaps that is part of the success factor. It goes on and on. The tradition continues. The son is now 11. He's already waiting every day to come along. Soon Maximilian and Marissa will be prince and princess. They will run an open house where everyone is welcome, regular people and nobility. That's very important to us, that everyone is involved, that everyone feels comfortable in this place. I have partly achieved that, but of course, it's a task that never ends. The Bentheim-Tecklenburgs, a dynasty in North Rhine-Westphalia with a royal future.